Greetings, class. These are the critical key terms from the chapter on social conflict, criminology, and restorative justice. So with critical criminology, the idea behind it is that conflict causes crime, but let me be more specific. Critical criminology theorists hold that the cause of crime can be linked to economic and social and political disparity. In their view, the law is an instrument of power wielded by those who control society so that they can maintain their wealth and social position and class advantage. In their view, the poor, who are often from ethnic minorities, are disproportionately punished when they commit crimes, and crimes are often, quote, expressions of rage over unjust economic conditions, end quote. So this critical criminology theory comes out of Karl Marx's theory of social conflict. In the critical criminologist view, crime is a political concept designed to protect the power and position of the upper classes at the expense of the poor. Real crimes can include, by this measure, violations of human rights due to racism, sexism, and imperialism, and other violations of human dignity, and violations of humans' basic physical needs and their basic necessities. So, second key term, supranational criminology. Aletzmüllers and Roelof Havemann coined the term supernatural criminology. The first word, supernatural, means transcending national boundaries, authority, or interests, according to Merriam-Webster. So the key term supernatural criminology, supranatural again, means the study of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the supranational penal system in which such crimes are prosecuted and tried, like the International Criminal Court in The Hague in the Netherlands. That's in Europe, and it's between what's to the north and south of the Netherlands is Belgium. On their right side is Germany, and across the pond is the British Isles. So that's where the Netherlands are. Just north of Belgium, which is, again, just north of France. So the textbook also uses this term, dropout factories, which is a term used to describe the 1,000 or so high schools, mostly in poverty-stricken inner-city neighborhoods, where the dropout rate is 60% or more. Of the 23,000 public and secondary high schools in the nation, 1,000 of them are so-called dropout factories. About half of all high school dropouts come from these schools. Note again that African American students are punished, we talked about this last time, much more harshly than other students for the same infractions when you look at student punishments nationwide. And critical thinkers might suggest that these class and race-based burdens make crime inevitable. I'd like you to know this version of the definition of globalization proposed by our textbook. The textbook calls globalization the process of creating transnational markets and political legal systems. How could globalization impact crime? Well, worth thinking about. Companies move factory jobs and phone service overseas, leaving people jobless here, who often, with factory jobs, don't have mobility, don't have college education, don't have a whole lot of options. So they leave people jobless and desperate. They move the factory jobs overseas and exploit the workers in the countries with weak labor laws, or the countries have ineffective or corrupt law enforcement. So, as I said, that means fewer jobs in the U.S., which largely impacts those without a college education. So this is often done to save money in corporate taxes. Is this an international crime when you globalize your company? International criminal organizations also have come up with globalized ways to perpetrate human trafficking crimes and cyber crimes, other forms of globalized criminal activity. I'd also like you to consider, under social conflict, critical criminology, and restorative justice, in that textbook chapter, state organized crime, which, as the textbook says, are acts defined by law as criminal and committed by state officials, either elected or appointed, in pursuit of their jobs as government representatives. So the state might go to war to support the capitalist classes who want the wealth of other nations. So the invasion of Iraq, to secure its oil for American use. It was justified at the time. I remember them saying this. They made claims of weapons of mass destruction, and that was the reason they were going to war. It was a false claim. They were lying. There were no weapons of mass destruction. There was no evidence of those weapons, ever. And the textbook also talks about Edward Snowden's blowing the whistle on illegal domestic surveillance in 2013, that the National Security Agency, the NSA, was illegally surveilling innocent people in the United States. Or was it illegal? A lot of questions around that. The textbook also talks about human rights violations in terms of state organized crime in Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, United Arab Emirates, and also the U.S. We send prisoners to other countries knowing for sure they are going to be harmed and tortured in the prisons they are sent to. State organized crime. And the textbook asks if wrongful convictions are a state crime. If someone is innocent and sent to prison, is that a state crime? There's also state corporate crimes, when the state allows power plants to build upriver or upwind from vulnerable and poor people, which causes their illness rates to spike, their cancer rates spike. State organized crime. Left realism. Before I go into left realism, I have to mention this idea of relative deprivation, which, if you've had my class before, we've discussed. Relative deprivation is a state when people realize they've fallen behind other groups, they're relatively deprived. That's different from absolute deprivation, which is the inability to provide the basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter. Relative deprivation is, I don't have as much as Johnny has. Absolute deprivation is, I have no food or clothing or shelter. So the internet adds to the relative deprivation. If you've got internet, you can see how others seem to be better off. So just keep that in mind when we talk about left realism. Left realism is an approach to discussing crime that views crime as a function of relative deprivation under capitalism, and that favors pragmatic, community-based crime prevention and control. So simply put, relative deprivation makes people discontent. Discontentment plus lack of a political solution causes crime. The textbook points out that street criminals usually prey on poor people, disenfranchised people, thus making the poor doubly abused by the system and by members of their own class. So the left realist perspectives, they favor efforts to prevent crime through community organization and youth involvement in what's called preemptive deterrence. Do something in the community now to prevent bad things from happening later. Now, critics argue we need to throw the whole system out, but throwing the whole system out is not terribly practical. Critical feminism. The critical feminism perspective is that capitalism creates patriarchy, male domination, which oppresses women. The critical feminists view gender inequality as stemming from the unequal power of men and women in capitalist and most modern society. The critical feminists typically look at such issues as the effect of gender inequality and the unequal power of men and women in a capitalist society. Maida Chesney-Lind, a researcher, has found that women and girls receive more punitive treatment. Women are more harshly punished than men or boys in the criminal justice system for the same crimes. Women receive much more punishing treatment, especially in cases involving sexual matters. Women are more harshly punished for the same crimes. I also want you to know this key term, role exit behavior. It's just an interesting sort of fancy way of talking about something that happens in the context of people without legitimate outlets. So let me sort of backtrack. John Hagen and his associates came up with this idea mentioned in the textbook called power control theory. That gender differences in the crime rate can be explained by the family structure under capitalism. In this patriarchy where we live, for example, girls don't often have the option in patriarchal families to act out. The boys are allowed, they can have a car, they can work part-time, they have access to more adult behaviors. But the girls have fewer outlets for antisocial behavior. And without those legitimate outlets, girls who are unhappy with their status, teenagers, seek out risky, what are called role exit behaviors in order to escape from the stifling life in the male-dominated family. These role exit behaviors can include running away and contemplating self-harm. This Hagen contrasts to the patriarchal family where the guy's in charge and, et cetera, et cetera. He contrasts that to what are called egalitarian families. Egalitarian families is not a key term, but families in which spouses, both partners, share similar positions of power at home and in the workplace. This kind of stuff doesn't have to happen. In egalitarian families, the tendency is for there to be acceptance of girls and boys growing up and trying new things. I want you to know about peacemaking criminology. The peacemaking criminologist's purpose is to promote a peaceful and just society. They want to bring humanity back into the criminal justice system. They view poverty as a source of suffering, almost a crime in and of itself that makes people suffer. So our work as peacemaking criminologists is to diminish crime through diminishing, the suffering that poverty causes, and to embrace social policies that reduce suffering. The peacemaking criminologists advocate conflict resolution strategies. So that ties into restorative justice. The restorative justice model holds that reconciliation, rather than retribution, should be applied to prevent and control crime. What does that mean? Well, there are a lot of different reconciliation programs and practices. And, retribution is prison, right? And since 2 out of 3 prison inmates recidivate, commit another crime soon after release, clearly the prison system isn't working well. So what about this restorative justice model? What is it? How does it work? So crime is redefined as a conflict among the offender, the victim, and the affected constituencies. That's the families, the schools, the workplaces. Who's impacted by the conflict? The restorative justice has to take place where the crime happened. So in a restorative justice context, regardless of the program or the practice, shared community outrage is directly communicated to the offender. The community has an opportunity to express their outrage. The victim also gets to voice their story. The offender is asked to recognize that their offense caused injury to both to the person and to social relations in the community. The offender has to determine to take responsibility. There is a reconciliation. Most offenders and victims actually know each other. How well it works depends on the stake the offender has in the community. The offender has to make the commitment to both material, that is monetary restitution, to repair, and to repair symbolically, to apologize. The community must also commit to